This video will focus on the details of controlling double title screen and also explore some of the movement techniques that double title screen can enable. There isn't a full new glitch being introduced in this video, but the basic techniques that are covered are important to know when setting up other glitches, and the more advanced techniques covered are nice to keep in mind when routing speedruns. I will be starting each demonstration in this video with double title screen already set up, and so you will need to know how to set up double title screen to follow along. A link to the video that explains and teaches double title screen can be found in this video's description. So here I am with double title screen set up, and the main focus of this video and all the demonstrations is going to be with one file loaded in and running at one layer, and leaving one of the double title screen layers as just the title screen. So I'm going to load in this lower Riverford file with the first double title screen, and for all what I'm going to be demonstrating, leave this title screen up front, still there. In some other setups or glitch transfers, you would eventually load in a second file, but what we're looking at is when we're in between that, maybe still setting something up on the background layer, the actual running game right now, or just exploring with this dual setup where you have the file on one side and the game running at another layer. Alright, so how do we control things? Well, currently the front layer title screen, the one existing that we have left over, is in control. Anytime we're in some sort of transition between certain screens of this, we will lose control of that, and whenever it's not in control, we can control the background layer. So for instance, when I go from continue to the file load screen, we can control the background layer. Now right now we can kind of see the background layer as a blank black screen, but if we look at the minimap, I can actually move around when going in between the continue and file load right now. And again, as soon as one of the file loads or something comes up, I can keep trying to move. We can kind of see that the minimap's not moving right now, but anytime I'm in between those transitions, I can control. Now, right now we're working with a black screen, and that's not ideal. That happens whenever you're doing double title screen stuff for most of the setups. If you have it with journal state, then it actually isn't as much of an issue, but nonetheless, it's a black screen. We need to clear that out. And as we saw with the double title screen videos, what we do to clear it out is just open and close the menu. But here's where we run into our first hurdle. Certain actions like menu will conflict with some of the stuff going on the title screen. Specifically on the file load, that's considered a menu in its own way, and when it loads in, it might start locking up controls in a new way with the background layer and never release them properly. So how do we work around that? Well, we just need to make sure that we open and close the menu before we're on the file load screen. So if I go from continue to file load right now, it's going to remain sort of on this main screen technically for a little bit and not have opened up the sort of menu context of the file load side. And I can open and close the menu of the game before we transition to the file load. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to do it super quick, and I'll mention why in a little bit, but I'm just going to hit continue and open close the menu. And now we can see again. That's nice. And we can move around. Great. And now whenever we go from continue, we can still see things, so that's going to persist. We just need to clear it at some point so that we could actually see. Now you might have noticed something a little bit there. At first, when we were moving around, we could actually see movement, but no longer. We've become invisible, and in fact, we've become intangible. This is the intangibility glitch state that has its own dedicated video, but I'm just going to mention everything relevant here. Intangibility is where your main character becomes invisible. They can pass through and not interact with anything, and they remain at the same elevation as well. So they're not going to fall at any point, they just kind of float in theory, but they're also invisible, so a little hard to tell. The remaining cast of characters kind of remains in place whenever you do that. Anyhow, that's intangibility. You can maybe look at the intangibility glitch video if you'd like, but that one's not too relevant. We'll learn about intangibility as we explore here. To clear intangibility state, as was with the other way we set it up in the other glitch video, we can just open and close the menu. And that, just like before, we need to do avoiding the file load side of things. So if I open and close the menu again right after hitting continue, I become tangible again. And I'm still tangible in normal state. And if I hit continue here, oh, I'm intangible again. That's just a consequence of working with this. whenever you're going from this main screen to the file load, or actually to any of the other screens that you could be going to, but we'll talk about those in a little bit, it puts you into intangibility. And it happens right around now. Right as it fades out, we become intangible. So we're actually tangible for the first few moments after hitting continue, but then there's just an instant where it puts you to intangible. No matter what state you were previously in, if you're intangible, you remain intangible. If you were previously tangible, normal state, then you become intangible at that moment. I can actually demonstrate this a bit more clearly. If I open and close the menu too quickly after hitting continue, then we would normally have that put us into the normal state of not intangible. But then we hit the moment where we become intangible again, and on that sort of timing, and that sort of one cycle, we'd remain intangible. So it's not very helpful. That is to say, you don't want to open and close the menu too quickly. Let me just show that here. If I do it too quick, I'm still intangible. I became tangible technically for a moment when doing that, but then we hit that moment where it puts us intangible again. So just keep that in mind as well. When you're hitting continue and open and close the menu, don't do it too fast. You can kind of learn the rhythm of it. Right around like that, as I've been demonstrating, is the good timing. Alright, so that's one piece of this. We need to do that, and we also need to avoid having the menu open over on the file load. But let's say what we have to avoid on the file load side of things exactly. When I hit continue and I open the menu, we can't have the menu up at any time overlapping with this file load. At this point, it's going to work to lock up our controls once we close that background menu. You could technically do a bit with the menu still open, and there is a way of getting out of this situation, which I'll talk about in a moment, but overall you don't want to have the menu open overlapping any time you're in this file load loaded in. That's any time it's basically mostly on the file load side of things, including when going back. If you open the menu too quickly, if you're on this screen normally and you don't have the menu open, and you tap B and then open the menu, or go back rather, and open the menu, that would also be overlapping too much and it would eventually lock up your controls. Now, it currently again doesn't seem like our controls are locked up, but if I close that menu, on one of these cycles it's just going to start locking up the controls on that background layer, and eventually the front layer even as well. You can mess around with this if you'd like, but overall I'm going to not be demonstrating too many of the fail cases as I go through these demonstrations. So how do we escape this? Well, there's actually one moment where we can escape it properly. And again, there's just some quirkiness to how these things are interacting. It's this file load considering itself some sort of menu state and locking up controls in its own way, and likewise the background menu being like it. If we close the menu sort of at different times, it doesn't know to release controls on the background layer properly and will lock up the controls. But if we go back from this file load and then immediately after close the background menu, it actually is safe again. It properly unlocks the controls on the background layer if we do it like that. Basically because you're doing it at the same time. You're closing two menus at the same time, and so the release of one is also triggering the release of the other properly. And so what does that mean? I'm just going to hit back and then menu immediately in succession, and on the control map that looks like B then X. This just needs to be pretty much instantly though. You can't give any delay to this, so just like that works. And my controls are not locked up. Again, not demonstrating the fail cases where your controls do lock up. You can explore that on your own time if you'd like, but that's just one solution to avoiding the menu lockup. So again, overall, opening and closing the menu with the early timing is fine. If for some reason something might be the case where you mess it up, or in some other scenario you have a certain setup that had you navigating the menu for a bit, you can get out of the menu if you're going from file load back by just doing B then X like that, and then we're fine. Again, you do have to do it as soon as you have any overlap of that menu open and the file load. You can't do this backing out of the menu at any other transition. If you've overlapped it at least once, you need to do that proper closing, B then X or whatever back, then close the menu at some point to properly save your controls. I've mentioned this a little bit on a few occasions as I've going through, but this has all been about when going from continue to file load. There are some differences if we were to instead be using settings and new game. In fact, it's in some ways a lot safer to do things on settings, less so on new game, but new game is also pretty safe in comparison to the file load. But it all depends a little bit on context. Now it's very similar. It's still when we transition from this main screen to, say, the settings screen, it will still put us intangible, basically the same exact timing there, well, exact same timing. But when going to settings, we don't actually have to worry about the menu timing as much. We could actually have the menu open and close it at basically any timing. And you might have seen that happen with the controls I was just doing in the background, but The unfortunate thing about the settings screen is that you can't actually see anything at all. So for that reason, it's not very useful. It's safer on the controls, but you can't see anything. You can still move around, and you can become tangible and interact with things freely. It's just, you can't see. And so that's why we usually use continue. It also is a longer transition when you go from continue to file load, or from this main screen to file load, I should say, via continue. And the only thing you have to worry about that is when you open and close the menu, which once you learn it is not too hard. You just do it right after hitting continue, and you're fine. But settings is another option, and in some cases can be helpful for other reasons, which we'll get to eventually. Very similar thing with new game. You can also likewise open the menu anytime with that, and we saw it for a moment there. There's a little bit more visibility when doing new game, but it again doesn't let you see much in comparison to continue. We could hit new game, we could try move around, just can't even see anything for that transition there. Back out, still can't see anything, but we were technically moving. It just wasn't visible. And so that's why I'm always going to recommend using continue. Alright, that is purely the fundamentals of moving around with these two layers. That is the key bit to this. Continue is the main option we're going to be using in general, and whenever you're going from continue, if you want to become tangible, you open and close the menu early on, and that way you can move around. And of course that gives you the largest timing before you can become intangible again, just doing it as early as possible. You move faster when you're tangible rather than intangible, so if you're trying to move around a lot, it's recommended that you do that, and of course you have to be actually in your normal state, the tangible state, to interact with things like loading zones and PCs. So you're quite often wanting to interact with the game that way, but intangibility has its own benefits, which we'll start getting into now. So once you've mastered the controls of actually moving around, again, using this continue option and opening and closing the menu, again, it's sort of a rhythm. You open and close the menu after hitting continue, and then back out, you can move some more. You can get around pretty far. But intangibility is sometimes useful. If I just don't close the menu, open and close the menu, I'll become intangible, and I can of course float around. As I mentioned earlier, when you're intangible, you pass through everything, you don't interact with anything, and you stay at the same elevation. So right now I'm invisible, floating sort of at the foreground. You can use the mini-map in the corner to help see where you are relative to things. If I ever want to become tangible again, well, I could, at any point, open close the menu, and we could see for a moment there I was floating, but then I fell because I was, when I loaded in that time, tangible. And now we're properly out of bounds. You can use this to pretty much completely freely explore out of bounds. With the other intangibility glitch setup, that was always when you're on a place where you get encounters and there was a signpost, so pretty limited, but this you can do anywhere. And, even better, you can switch between tangible and intangible, so you can actually change your elevation and then go back to intangibility. It gives you a lot of freedom for exploring things. So right now I'm out of bounds. I'd actually be stuck in that river, but of course I'm not actually stuck because I can just become intangible again. If at any point you fall off the world, so right now I'm going to become tangible and start falling, and I fall into the void there, or the abyss I should say. I guess I'm not properly far off. I'm on a platform. Oh no, sorry, what happened there was I did the timing too quickly. I never became tangible long enough to actually fall. There we go. Anytime you fall off the world, you respawn to wherever your save was, which was this save point, of course, for this file. And we're fine from there. Alright, but this intangibility lets you do a lot of things. We're going to go into a use case of it to actually, well, do something new and original in a little bit. But you can also just use it for exploring, which is pretty nice. And at any point, if you want to actually make a save and use it, you could actually create a sort of teleport. I'll demonstrate that later on in the video, just because that would result in loading in a file. But if you ever get tired of having to switch between title and so on, well, you can actually make it so you're permanently tangible and in an actual loaded file by loading in, well, a second file at some point, while doing a warp. And you're basically creating a warp wherever your current character is for that second file. Anyhow, I went exploring off to the up and left direction, and this is actually to demonstrate that some maps are connected in ways you wouldn't really expect. This is actually really rare for anything that's not a manor or certain other special screens, but it happens to be the case in this Riverford area. Lower Riverford and the screen that's just outside the manse here are actually the same exact map. It's not showing the loading zones on our minimap just because it doesn't load in that way. It removes some icons when you load from one screen versus another, but these are actually perfectly connected. We could take a loading zone here and it would take us all different spots. This is a proper way of getting there. This isn't as useful as it sounds. Most maps are just their own map, but there are things. I've mentioned manors and manses. The ones that you have some of the chapter dungeons take place in are usually connected between their screens. You can actually tell that because of how encounters work on those screens as well. And then other situations, one of note is the library and Atlasdam and the palace. And, sorry, I suppose I should say the academy and the palace are the same sort of map. The library is not, that one's just a house, but the palace and the academy are a connected map. You can see these things prop up here and there. Certain other dungeons are also connected, but in general, everything gets its own map, and this isn't super useful. It's not a fast way to get between screens too often. Alright, let's demonstrate one last thing while we're out here, and that's about changing your respawn location. Now I mentioned when we fall off the map, we go to wherever our last save was, but we can actually revert the respawn location to the default on whatever map we're in. So I'm real quick just going to appear here for a moment, just so we can see where I am next to this edge. And I'm going to go and watch something in the journal. And I'm going to do that just opening up the menu and navigate my way into the journal. And we'll ignore some of the story stuff going on in the background. I'll pick something from here. Whenever you watch something in the journal, it loads in the cutscene temporarily, and then after it's done, watching it brings you back to the map, but that reloading of the map that we're currently on will basically reset a few things. In particular, it resets the respawn location back to whatever's considered the map's default, which is at some sort of entrance or exit of the map that is considered the default one. And so if I go and watch something in the journal right now, it would reset the respawn location. Now here's an example of something where we're doing something and we have to again be careful about controls locking up. Now we've been in the menu for a while, that's actually not the concern right now. It's whenever we activate something, like watching a cutscene, that's considered an event activation. You see this sort of idea show up in all sorts of glitch setups with the double title screen that you have to often avoid. And we also mentioned a bit when even just setting up title screen itself, whenever you do a confirmation, it will trigger something on certain screens. If you're on the file load, it'll open up a file. On the settings screens, it does nothing. On the new game screen, it will load in a brand new Ophelia file. And if you're on the title screen, it'll take you to new game. So you just have to be careful wherever you do it. But a lot of the logic that applies, that we were talking about when doing double title screen, applies with this and in general. If I'm wanting to watch something in the journal, that counts as a confirmation right now when I hit yes and also finish the cutscene. And so I want to do it in a place where it doesn't mess up. I specifically want to avoid doing it on the file load screen, and I also want to do it on the don't want to do it on the main screen, because that can then lead into the new game, which with a second event trigger could lead into loading a new file. The safest place to do it is in settings, but a pretty common place since we're going between continue back and forth is just to do it when returning from the file load screen back to the main screen. So right now I'm on file load, that's what's currently in control. I'm going to go back and then immediately confirm watching this cutscene in the journal. Now we see the one activation there took us to new game, but I did it quick enough so that it didn't get both its activations. If you're slower, it'll activate once to take you to new game, and then as the cutscene finishes loading in, it actually is still on the new game screen and would take you into a new Ophelia file. So you have to avoid those situations. So we have the cutscene running. I'm just going to press and hold B, and we now get the title screen music because I pressed B there. Once the cutscene concludes, we're actually primarily in control of this background layer, which is a bit of an odd state that you can get into in a few ways, and can be helpful when you can get it on the overworld, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I can just press the menu button to close the menu right now, and things are fine. It didn't matter when I closed that menu because that was the primary control. Alright, so that's mostly a demonstration of things to keep in mind. You can do menu stuff, and you just need to avoid confirmations on some of these screens. If you don't do it at the right timing there, you would load in new games, stuff like that. You don't want to go when going to file screen. The safest place to do it is in settings though. I'll demonstrate that real quick, just while I'm here. I'm going to watch, well, the same thing in the journal. Oops, don't want to load that. Sort of priming the cutscene, but you can even generously be back a few steps from this. And I'm just going to go into settings and hit yes. The confirmation on the settings screens, well, it doesn't do nothing, it just returns you to the main screen. And pretty safely, because it then doesn't follow that up, take you to new game, if you're fast enough about it. And even if it did, it wouldn't be permanently locking you or starting in a file, so it's the safest place to do it is in settings, if you're really needing to. And sometimes that's just the timing. If you're on the continue side of things, or if you're on this main screen, you're about to watch something, you might as well switch down to settings, because if you were to do it when to do on continue, you'd have to wait before loading in, because you'd have to do it from the file loads going backwards. Whereas if you're on this screen, you just want to go through settings. Alright, enough of that. Again, I'm just going to skip this cutscene. Let's remind ourselves of what this was even talking about in this first place. Well, if I hit continue and look around, again I was by this edge. By watching something in the journal, my default respawn location has been moved to whatever the default spawn of this map is. I'm no longer going to go to the save point. I'm going, well, what it considers the default spawn right here, which, if you're actually playing the story that takes place in this town, is an actual entrance. It's not currently for this file, but nonetheless, it took me there anyways. Every single map has a default spawn location. I'm actually going to be talking about the default spawn locations of all the different maps later on in this video, because there's some interesting little bits of tech that you can do to navigate maps in succession, jumping to entrances and exits all over the place using these techniques. But that will come in time. Alright. So that's moving. That covers a lot of it. There's one last detail that you want to keep in mind. Oops, sorry. I've been doing that too much. Let me be slower about my menu and open close there. The last major detail is about going to a new screen, going through an actual loading zone. Well, if I approach it while intangible, I just pass through it, so that's something to keep in mind. It sort of puts the text on screen as though you're near it sometimes, but overall I can't interact with it. I can interact with it when intangible, but just like with loading something in the journal, you don't want to do that because it counts as a confirmation. You don't want to do that on some of the screens. You don't want to go it when going to the file load. You don't want to do it while on this main screen, because then it can trigger twice and load a new game. You want to either do it when going back from the file load to this main screen, or again, just do it with the settings screen. That's usually the safest. But just to demonstrate, I'm going to become tangible. So here I am tangible near the loading zone, and now when going back from file load, this is a safe moment to do it, I can run towards the loading zone. Alright, and so I went through it. Again, just a little bit of a detail, but you'd have to pay attention to when you do certain triggers like that. That one worked out plenty fine. And just as well, we can do it going through settings, again, becoming tangible again. Well, I suppose that wasn't a good demonstration, for reasons I'll talk about in a moment. Become tangible again, and then run right. Again, I have to do it blind, but it's not too bad if you've already positioned yourself near a loading zone, you can just do that. And now we're back on the other screen. Now something that I worked around there for a moment, but you'll notice as you work with these is that after you go through a loading zone, it takes a moment for the game layer to be controllable again, for some reason. If I hit continue, and I'm just going to hold right and not become tangible, you'll see the minimap's not going to move for a moment, and then it starts moving. When you first load in a screen, whether it's from loading zone, or as we'll demonstrate in a moment, from warping on the map, it will not let you move around with the game layer for just a little bit. The specific reasons, who knows at this point. It's a bunch of layering stuff, but basically you can't move for a moment. Just keep that in mind for certain times of things. You just won't move for the first moments. But timing-wise, there's actually a nice way you can sort of work with this. I'm just become tangible again. I'm going to move near this. I'm going to run through this transition. As it's going, it's loading, and then I can hit continue around there, and as soon as it actually matters, I can start moving. Basically using the fact that I can hit continue while it's still loading things in, so that the moment I become movable again is when I can first actually move. Again, that's just a little bit of a tiny timing detail, but it can sometimes save little bits of time or get you a little bit of extra distance. Whatever it might be, it's just an option. One last thing I'll mention is that, of course, because you can't move immediately, you can't even become tangible again. A common thing I'll do if I need to move right after going through a loading zone is basically wait a moment. As soon as I have control, just open the menu normally, and then do the immediate close or back out and then close the menu action. That way I can become tangible for that movement part. It just helps make the timing a bit easier, because you can't fully open and close the menu whenever you're doing it, so you can just open the menu as you go to the file load. Towards the end of it, you open the menu, and then go back from file load and close the menu, becoming tangible to move a bit further. Alright, and that brings us around to just one last thing to demonstrate for movement tech, and then we'll get into some other more complicated things. And that's going to be bypassing guards using intangibility. Now we've seen bypassing guards with journal state, If you want, you can review that video for some of the details there, but with that we were able to unload guards by tricking the game into thinking we're indoors while we're outdoors. And it's going to be a very similar thing here, but if anything, conceptually simpler. So what are we going to do? Well, let's look. We've got this guard we want to bypass, and we just need to enter any house that we can. To enter a building, you do have to be tangible, so right there, I went to tangible and then ran around a bit. I was still tangible when I entered the building. And so I'm safely inside this. Now how do we exit this building? Well, we want to make the game continue thinking we're inside it, so we're just not going to use the proper exit. We'll just use intangibility to walk through the wall. So again, we naturally get intangibility when we go from continue to file load, or any of the transitions really. But right there we became intangible, and we can just pass right through the wall. And as soon as we're outside, well, we have all the guards and NPCs outdoors in general unloaded. And if we become tangible again, we can even move around, that's plenty fine, and we can just walk into this house as though it's nothing. And all NPCs that are indoors, you can interact with those as well. So there's actually an NPC around a table, back in the corner somewhere, there they are. You can't see, unfortunately, just like with the other version with Journal State, you can't see with those cases, but you can still find the NPCs and interact with them. Alright, if we were to try and leave this building right now, well, tangible, we'd be able to normally exit, but we'd still be blocked by the guard that's sitting outside it. So how do we exit? Well, we can just be intangible and walk through a wall again, if we need to. And so now we're outside. If you ever need to put the game back into how it was, well, by normal, we can just enter a building, say the one we started with, or any of them that we can actually exit, ones that aren't guarded. And then, while tangible, actually walk outside. And the game is back to normal. Of course, the other way we can exit a building is just using the map. And so that's going to be one last thing I'll mention here. The map's actually not too bad compared to all these other things. It's pretty free on how you do it. However, there is technically a confirmation. So very similar to loading zones and events and stuff like that, we have to avoid hitting this confirmation when in a certain stage. However, unlike some of the other things, there's only one trigger of a confirmation. You don't have to worry about being late on something. The timing is actually pretty generous. You can't just be right at the end point. It's a little bit strange as I described there, but basically don't be all the way at the end. I'm going to demonstrate how late we can press things in, so I'm going to hit back and then hit yes pretty far back out of the title screen. Even so, if I'm on the title screen, it's fine, it's only one trigger of the activation. Just make sure you're not on the file load or new game screen and you'll be fine. So I can go all the way back here, can hit yes all the way with that. That's basically as late as it needs to be, because it's pretty much instantaneous as far as the timing goes. Even then, yeah, it put me to the new game screen, but that's plenty fine. So it's safe enough, and if you do it any earlier than what I was demonstrating, just a little bit faster, then you don't even have to worry about it transitioning between things at all. Alright, and with that, that pretty well covers the core concepts for controlling double title screen. If you're just using double title screen to set up other glitches, this is more than enough. In fact, all you really need is the ability to move around at all with double title screen for other glitches. The other details, like going out of bounds or inside of houses, loading zones, it's nice to understand those just so that you know what to avoid, or the ideas of certain event triggers when in double title screen, and which screens to be on with that. But if you just want to move around, and you can go from continue to file load and back and forth and move in those transitions, that's plenty for the glitch setups in the series. What's remaining in this video is just a few other specific details, and they're mostly just relevant for speedrunning. Path actions will be covered there, and there's a certain technique that comes out of path actions that allows us to move around the world a lot more freely. And then the ways we can actually apply that in some overworld movement also is going to get covered. Now, path actions might sound a rather useful thing to be able to do in double title screen, however, for most experiences, and even in the speedrun sense, they're not all that useful for the sake of the path action. If you want to do path actions and get items or whatever else from them, just do it without double title screen. Just interact with NPCs normally, that's plenty. You'll not need to do it amid double title screen, but I'll be covering them and how you can do them exactly for completeness anyways. Alright, and so to get these final bits of demonstrations, or the path action part at least, we're going to move back to Riverford just because I had some specific things in mind from there. Alright, here I am back in Riverford, over on this screen. And let's get into path actions. To use path actions, we need to be tangible, to interact with NPCs at all, that is. And, well, we just can go up to an NPC while tangible and do the path actions. Once we have the path action menu, We can use the transitions as much as or as little as we might want. And really, we could actually even become intangible once we have that menu open. I'm currently intangible. We just need to be tangible when we open up that menu. Alright, so when do we want to activate and do path actions? Well, different from a lot of the cases when we're in double W screen, we actually want to activate them when going from continue towards file load, or at least we want to avoid it when going back to this main screen. You could go towards the settings screen to the new game screen. Continue to file load, we'll still have a bit of visibility, so we're going to continue demonstrating with that. The reason we want to do it there is actually that path actions, they've got menus and submenus and little confirmation boxes, but none of them actually are a confirmation event. In fact, it's a whole different event system with path actions. What they do have, though, is a sort of cancel event when you close out some of them. Any of the ones with menus, purchase, steal, and if you're doing the examine menu for beast lore, that also is sort of a menu. If you back out of those or even purchase the last thing, it considers it a sort of closing action. It's a cancel event, and that can trigger things on the title screen, but the other screens are safer from that. Alright, so let's actually see this in action. I'm just going to hit continue, and I'm just going to actually go up to the scrutinize and demonstrate that one. Any time in the transition, we can do that. Still in control of the title screen, but we can see scrutinize popped up in the background. And we can walk through the scrutinize steps in however pace we might want to do, amid these transitions, whatever makes sense. And we're done with the path action. Now, path actions have a nice side effect that I was mentioning as I was introducing this section, and that's that if we look right now, the game is actually still a bit running. The minimap, if we're looking, is moving around. We're currently intangible, so we're passing through things, but yeah, we can move around, and we're in control of the title screen. This makes it a whole lot easier to move around in comparison to having to go just moving in transitions. And so if you're doing large distances, it's recommended to use some of this path action tech to set things up and then move quite far. In fact, if I was tangible, I could even go through loading zones. So I'm actually going to go and demonstrate that. I was just intangible because I took too many transitions when setting things up and demonstrating for the moment right here. But let's become tangible. Let's go up to an NPC. And actually, just for perfect demonstrations, I'm going to make sure this all goes well. I'm going to go down to purchase and prepare it. And we're going to actually do this going towards the file load side. The only difference between the two different sides is again about that cancel action, which can cause some issues, but if we set up path actions well and we just activate them immediately, it doesn't really matter which side. Strangely enough, going from the main screen towards file load is the easier and safer option, which is why I recommended it at first. It has a longer time that you can activate path actions and still be safe. When going from file load back to the main title screen, something about it, I think the game already being more fully loaded in, lets the path actions animate differently or gives their context more priority. It has a more strict timing, but you can still do it going from file load to the title screen. You just have to do it immediately. So you notice when I was setting up going from these transitions, I'm actually already hovering over purchase. I'm about to demonstrate purchase. And I just need to make sure I activate purchase immediately. So I'm going to go back and then immediately activate purchase. And that was plenty good timing. We're still in control of the title screen layer. If we'd done it too late, which again for purchase and steal in particular, they have a large startup or a long startup, you'd see that you'd be in control of the path action menu, which we don't want, especially for going on the title screen side of things. Alright, anyhow, we can now continue through these menus. Again, even something like this little confirmation box, it looks like the things we might see when looking at something in the journal or triggering an event. It's not an actual confirmation box for an event though, it's just a box in itself, it's a little submenu. So we can do that plenty safely. And whenever we're ready, we can back out of the purchase. And there's a little bit more text to get through, I guess. And by the end of it, we're all set and fine. Now, we noticed for a moment, it didn't actually give us the full game control. It's, again, a little bit of differences between the different types of path actions. Really, it's scrutinize that lets you get the full game control without any extra steps. So sometimes that's a nice idea of that. Now I'm going to show a way of deliberately setting it up, and that deliberate setup is also more convenient because we can remain tangible throughout it. So I've mentioned how you want to do path actions immediately in these transitions. Well, what happens when we delay them a little bit? Well, to do that, I'm going to use the final path action on the menu that I haven't done yet, guide, and just guide this NPC. In fact, guide is ordinarily one of the easiest ones to do. there's plenty of spacing timing, but I'm going to deliberately do it late. And when I do it late enough into this, we can see we're in control of this path action menu. If I guide successfully, or if I don't, either way, when I close it out, when you do it in that way, no matter which path action you're taking, it will give the game layer and title screen both controls right now. So we can see we're moving around with the mini-map again. And I did that all in one transition because it gave full control of the path action. I didn't have to do extra transitions to finish up the path action itself. And so that way of setting up lets us remain tangible. Right now, I was tangible when I interacted with the NPC. I did the path action. I haven't done an additional transition. I can actually go through loading zones right now. And so let's just show that off. There we go. And so you get a pretty full range of movement. But it's just about moving around. If you try and interact with things in the world, it'll usually lock up your controls, so you don't want to do any of that. And just as well on the title screen side of things, we don't want to hit B right now, or cancel, whatever your cancel button is. That would go to the press any button screen. That would give priority to the title screen, and not immediately release it back to the game. If things won't resolve correctly, it would lock up your controls. But if we want to go back to things controlling as normal, once we have this game and title screen hybrid set up at the moment, if we ever want to put it to the more traditional double title screen setup, just hit continue or any of these different menus so that the game gets control again. I'm going to become tangible as I do that as well. Things are back to normal. Alright, so in summary, so far, any of the path actions can be done. If you do it from the main title screen towards file load, that tends to be safer. There's a larger window of timing to do it. If you do them early enough on that transition, then you just have to complete the path action going between things. If you do them late in any of the transitions, then it'll give the path action more priority. And then, based on path actions, there's a few different differences. For guide and allure, these both have a pretty quick timing, so you have to deliberately delay them if you want to give them more priority. For scrutinize, it's also pretty quick. It's sort of a medium-length activation on it, and I guess inquire is involved in that. I always think of scrutinize, but yes, inquire included. And the other thing about inquire and scrutinize is that they can, just by themselves, even if you do the early timing, still give the game layer priority. And then purchase and steal, they take the longest for these transitions, so you want to activate them immediately if you're not wanting to give them full priority. And if you are going to give them full priority, you have to make sure you're doing it from this continue side to the file load, because if you try and close out of their menus when on this main title screen, it will lock up your controls because that's a cancel action and it'll lock for the other reasons we mentioned. Alright, so lots of options for them. As far as provoke and challenge go, you can do those pretty freely. They don't have too many issues. Pretty similar to setups you'll do on any of these, but yes, there's those. One additional note that I'll say is that, and I'll just maybe move my way into the next demonstration, if you do any of them way too late, then it will cause an issue. So I've mentioned how guide and lure are pretty safe. Let me maybe guide and lure this NPC here. If I were to hit back right now, and I do the late guide, I just have to make sure it's not very, very late. If I do it just before the title screen gains controls, that's too late in the process. It might seem like the timing is relatively similar to what's going on for controls being given away, but no, if you do it that late, it'll kind of shift the controls completely to the game and lock up the controls when you conclude your path action. So just make sure that if you're doing the timings, and you're trying to give the path actions more control so that you can do the whole double game control stuff, you just do it late enough, but not too late. And the timing of that is anywhere past the fade to black is plenty safe, and anything later than that is getting a little risky. If you do too late, it'll lock up your controls. And too early, it just won't give the path action control. But as we can see, that timing was fine. I have control of just the path action here. And again, a nice thing about giving path action controls, you can go through multiple steps and not have to worry about it. And the other benefit is that, well, yes, we can move around. A nice thing about being able to move around is that you can actually go upstairs a bit easier. If you are trying to climb things like stairs when doing the whole continue to file load transitions, the moments that you're intangible can sometimes clip you inside of stairs, and so if you can remain fully tangible for a long time, it's helpful for climbing stairs. I just successfully climbed up some stairs just then. But yeah, any which way, we can do it. We've got the setup. Alright, there's one other way we can actually set up this double game layer, and it still has to do with path actions. but it's with the other type of path action menus that we can do. And specifically, it's the ones when you do it when you're not near any NPCs. It's releasing NPC companions with Guide and Lure, as well as looking at Beast Lore with the Examine path action. And those just as well, they have the same ideas with timings. You want to do them early in the transition if you don't want to have them interact with the layers at all. If you do them late enough, again kind of overlapping with the second side of transition, then you can activate them and give those path action menus more control. When you come out of it, you get the double controls. And so just to demonstrate that, well, I'm going to do it on this next transition, and actually this isn't a transition we've seen quite yet. You can do the giving path action section control if you do it with file load. As I've said, going towards file load is a larger window of when you have to do things, so in fact you actually have to do these path actions pretty late if you're doing it towards file load. I can go open, close, open menu, and then part ways. I did it. Too late in that case. Let me go back, I guess. If I do it really late on, somewhere along there, even that, okay, that was plenty fine. We can see we got control of the path action, and we can move around fine. And this is actually a kind of nice side, because you can actually see things pretty well. I'm currently in tangible, so I can't go through loading those just because I took an extra transition there, but you can definitely do this while tangible. The benefits of the title screen side version of this is that you can see the minimap though, so it's kind of a trade-off. You can either see the game world a little bit in this fuzzy view that you have here, or you can see the minimap. I'll usually opt for the minimap. Its markers are pretty helpful, and if you're intangible you can just move towards a marker and that'll be plenty fine. But if you're doing other navigations, then yeah, having it around on the world, actually visible, is pretty nice too. Alright, and again, if we just go back, we're fine. We're now back to a typical title screen, double title screen sort of setup. Now the other menu that we have is Examine. That's sort of looking at our Beast Lore, the different Honnet captures that we currently have. That opens a menu though, and so we don't want to do that one going towards title screen. So in fact, if we're doing Beast Lore in particular, we want to make sure we're doing it going towards the file load side, or anything other than the title screen. And so I'll open and close, I'll go down here and examine, that works fine. And we can see we're in the Beast Lore menu. Again, this sort of a menu we don't want to have up on the main title screen, because if we ever do a cancel action on this, or as earlier was mentioned with Purchase and Steal, it locks up the controls when we're on the main title screen in particular. But I can back out of that plenty fine on this file load screen. And just as well, we've again got control of both layers. Moving around, real nice. Alright. Now one last detail to this is ways of, well, moving around ever so slightly faster. When we do that, we're controlling both layers, but if we ever press B on one of the sides, well, it's just going to take us back. But B is also the run button, or at least it is when you're using a controller. Or the default controls for what I have set up at least. Anyhow, the run button and the cancel button are sort of the same thing, which can be a bit of a difficulty. Well, if you do the timings right, you can actually be running while doing all of these setups. And it's just that you have to make sure you press B after doing, press and hold B after doing any of these sort of transitions or menus, whatever it might be. So for example, if I'm going from the, let's actually do an example back from the other direction first. If I'm going from this direction, I would have to press the cancel button, B I'm just going to call it, to go back from file load right now. And then I could do the whole path action menus, but once I'm in those path action menus, it won't really register that I'm starting to run. And I can't just press and hold B right now, because like in many scenarios in this game, if you just hold the run button too early, it won't register that you're running. You have to sort of, after you have the ability to run, then start running. And so the way to actually get running here is just that I'm going to press B to cancel here, and then I'm going to press and hold B as I do the path action stuff. And then I'll open the path action menu and never release B throughout all of that. And you can look at the button map to see exactly what I mean with all this. So tapping once, pressing and hold, and let's say part ways. And I'm still holding B. In fact, I did part ways too early, so this is a poor example of this. Let's, I guess, do one more attempt at that. So again, I'm just going to hold B, and then do a delayed part ways properly. And I'm still holding B with all of that. And I'm never going to release B. Yes, you could close this menu here with tapping B, but we can actually just do that with tapping A on no. And now I'm running around. And I'm even tangible, because the setup going into this was being tangible. So I can run around pretty quickly. And it's a little hard to see from the minimap, but yeah, you can see that movement speed. As soon as I release B, we can see a slowdown. Alright, so we can run around a bit. Actually, it only lets us move around faster when tangible. If you're intangible, running and not running are the same. It doesn't make a difference there. But yeah, it's a convenience. If we're doing large distances, we certainly want to be able to run around. And so doing that with guide and allure is a nice easy way of doing it. You can do it with the beast lore menu. However, it's a little bit more difficult, actually a fair bit more difficult overall, and has some extra wrinkles to it. For one, beast lore can only be done when we're going from main screen towards file load, or rather it just can't happen on this main screen. That's because it has its own menu, and when we close that menu, it's a cancel action. We can't be doing that on the main screen here. The other part to that is that, well, there's a menu we have to cancel, and we're pressing and holding the run button with how we've been doing this. With guide allure, we can hit A to hit no to stop inspecting an NPC, but beast lore, you can't just press some confirm to close out of it. You actually have to hit, well, cancel, and run and cancel are commonly mapped to the same thing. That's just a small note. There's an easy way around this. If we look at our settings, on a controller, yes, run and cancel are on the same button, but on keyboard, they're not. Cancel is its own key. I've remapped dash to space, but yes, it's its own key. You can also do a combination of keyboard and controller. And actually, keyboard even has an additional button that can be pressed to escape that closes out the beast lore menu. You would normally open your menu in other contexts, but yes, it'll close out beast lore just as well. In any case, that works around the whole idea of not having to release the run button. We can just hold the run button and then use some other cancel action on some other control, and we'll be able to close the beast lore menu. The final difficulty with all this, which is the actual difficulty, is timing. Beast lore again has to go from main screen to file load, but to actually make any use of this, we want to be tangible, because running only matters when we're tangible. And so when we're going and hitting continue here, we have to open and close the pause menu first to become tangible, and then press and hold the run button, and then open the path action menu, get to beast lore, and open that up. It's actually rather tight on the timing. There's another thing that makes this ever so slightly harder to time. After closing a menu, and this happens in normal gameplay, you can't immediately run. If I open and close a menu and I press hold B early, we can see I was just walking around for a moment there. Again, you can see this in normal gameplay. But if you press and hold B before you actually have control of your overworld, then you're not actually going to be running yet. You have to make sure you start running after you're actually in control after closing the menu. So just keep that in mind with the timing. We want to do things fast, but not too quickly. And of course, part of not going too quickly is also with becoming tangible. Opening and closing that menu there can't happen too fast. If you do too fast, you just remain intangible. So a whole lot of things to keep in mind, but we hit continue, we open and close menu, again not too fast, but just fast enough. After we're fully out of the menu, wait a moment, and then press and hold the run button. Then we go into the path action menu as quick as we can and activate that. And as a final hurdle to this, again, we want to make sure we activate the path action before we fully load it on the other side to get all this transitioning stuff work, especially with beast lore. If we do it at the very last moment, that locks up controls. We haven't seen a demonstration of that, of course, quite yet, but just again, if you do any of these path actions, even the normal ones for interacting with NPCs, if you do that at the last possible moment of a transition, then it'll lock up your controls, so we kind of want to also be careful of that. That would be a bad scenario to be in, not as resettable. Alright, so a demonstration, and we'll see how well we can do with this. We're going to hit continue, open close menu, press and hold B, go to the path action menu, get over to beast lore, and examine, all before it transitions. It's a tight timing, but let's see it. Alright, nice. And so we can see that we've got the menu up in the background. Now if I move around, we're controlling that menu, as was the same case with the guide and or allure. And this whole time I'm holding B. And to finally finish this up, we again have to have one of the alternatives for cancel figured out. Either backspace or escape works. And with that we can close out the beast lore menu, because there isn't some sort of no button to be pressed with beast lore, unlike guide and allure. So I'm just going to press escape here, and with the menu closed, we can now run around successfully using beast lore. Alright, and as always, we can go between loading zones a little bit. And despite loading zones normally being an event trigger, even when you're on the file load side of things, it is fine. It's again this weird hybrid state. It's a little bit different. It's a little unstable when you're on the title screen side. Again, you can't do cancel actions, you can't really interact with things. When you want things to be put back to normal, you'll make sure you actually, well, back out of this in a pretty rigid way. Don't go into menus or interact with things too much when doing this hybrid state. Alright, then as I was mentioning earlier, it's very convenient. This version of it, where you can on the file load side, you can actually kind of see the world a little bit. The title screen version of it is convenient as well, because you have the minimap, you can line things up with that. Both of them have their uses. And as mentioned before, it's also convenient for going downstairs. Yeah, we're going down some stairs right now. Plenty good with that. We can even go inside buildings, perhaps a little bit easier, but, well, we can't open the door as nicely, so gotta be careful with that. Again, any sort of actions or interactions with the world could mess things up, so just be careful with it. Alright, let's back out. One last thing I'm gonna talk about is events, and I'm gonna be demonstrating with a side story right now. But events in general, when to activate them. This is very similar to when we've talked about things in the journal. This is an actual event. You just don't want to do it when you're on the main screen here. You can do it in settings, you can do it wherever. This is cutscene triggers, this is side stories. Those are technically a little bit different in how they're controlled as events, or sorry, as the story progression stuff. But they're both events, and so very similar in that. I'll just demonstrate that real quick while I'm here. You can go inside this building. Head on over to here. We wouldn't want to activate the event when we're right next to this. That would immediately trigger it, just for what this current cutscene is. We can do it from the settings plenty safely. We do it early enough when going from file load back to the main screen, that's fine. Let's just do it from settings. Seems we triggered it. We were safe there. And we concluded it. And that is also something that pops up on the top layer, but we only have control of the main game. Everything's fine. We've got controls. All set. Alright, so that covers the movement. Events was a little tacked on there, but nonetheless, that covers most of what we want to do. Again, if you're going large distances, this whole stuff with path action is rather convenient, because you can do the whole hybrid movement where you're just moving around. You have to be careful with it a little bit, but it's plenty fine. You can go between screens, go across the overworld if you're running. Recommended is that you do this with Ophelia, Primrose, and if you need to, Haunted. However, you could even get away without those characters. You just have to start it when you're next to an NPC, but in those cases you can still set it up well enough. Some intricacies with purchase and steal, but otherwise you can set them up. If you really need to, you just do it towards the file load side. That's the more stable version. Anything that's a menu, just avoid the main title screen side. Alright, and just to give a practical example of this, I'm going to just throw an example in here from directly out of a Ophelia single story route. We're over in the road to Seaside Grotto, and we're just going to see what we can do for a little bit of movement. Now, ordinarily in this route, you'd do a resource reclaim in the Mystery Man Shady Figure fight, and after the fight you'd transfer the completion of that fight and the cutscene after it onto some earlier files, so you reclaim resources while still getting the rewards from the fight. But that's over in the Seaside Grotto. There's a lot of screens leading up to that that'll be nice to skip over. This first one, the road to it, you usually get an encounter on, and it's a rather long screen. And the screen after that, you normally even have to save and exit, which is rather slow. And so if we're going to be doing something in the Mystery Man Shady Figure fight, might as well do some movement leading up to it to cut some time out of those screens. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you always route these sorts of things in. Maybe we don't even do a resource reclaim, but this at the very least makes the cost of actually setting up the glitch to do the resource reclaim cost less time, because you're getting it back with this movement. Alright, so let's see in practice. Again, here I am over on Seaside Grotto. Instead of walking the screen, let's just walk out of bounds. Let's become intangible, passing through these rocks here. We're just going to go and watch something in the journal. I'm taking a lot of steps out of it to maybe talk as I do this. I'll do it in the settings so that as I watch something here, it just returns back to the title screen. Actually, I did it way late on that. The double trigger brought us to the new game, but that's plenty safe. That's why settings is very safe in general. Closing out the menu in the background there. Going to put us back on the title screen. And as I did that, I also became tangible. Anytime you close the menu there, you became tangible, and I fell out of the world, and I respawned over by the Seaside Grotto. We can see on the minimap there. Yep, we're over by the cutscene. Let's go trigger that cutscene. We can do that with settings, plenty safe. I walked right into the cutscene trigger, activating it. And in fact, let's use settings again to move left into the cave. Just to keep it nice and safe there. Keeps pushing us back to this main screen when we do that early enough into the settings transition. Alright, now we would have to go all the way to the boss and trigger the boss itself. Well, to move that way, we'll just use intangibility. And we'd have to move across a rather large screen, so let's also do stuff with NPCs. Now we do want to be intangible, we don't have to worry about running, but we're not going to become tangible as we go up and left here. And then somewhere around here, we do the part ways. Back out of that, and now we can just hold up left and move freely. Again, running doesn't help when you're intangible, but we're able to just pretty freely move across the screen. It's a little slow, but still faster than going all the way around and having to save and close. And again, I often using the mini-map rather than the actual visual screen that you can get when you're on file load, because you can just line things up on the mini-map like, well, story points. We're currently actually in the ground. If we become tangible here, we'll be pushed up into the boss fight itself. Some sorts of geometries will push you up. If you were too low in the ground, you might fall out of the world, but you just kind of have to find setups that work. And so in this case, becoming tangible right in this position works rather nicely. So I'll just do that, open and close the menu, and we can see, yep, we've got something activated. It was specifically the cutscene. I would ordinarily be holding B there, but now we're in the fight. And we'd actually carry out this fight. I'm not going to go into those details. And then right towards the end of the fight, open up a second file. That all has to do the actual glitch setups that you can do with double title screen. But we can see how we can actually use our movement tech leading into those glitches. Again, another very good use case, not just resource reclaims, is that credit skip. It really depends on what final chapter you wind up doing. Ophelia Chapter 4, for example, is rather nice. It's got a winding path leading up to the final fight. And so you can just intangibility walk your way through that. Ordinarily you might get an encounter, although you might also try and pick up chests in some routes, so it varies on how much you actually have to do on that screen. Some other screens might be better for it. It all varies a little bit. You can use these intangibilities as far back as you might be able to handle, so long as it helps some efficiency with walking around. If you're doing things in towns though, with a lot of story stuff, with path actions, recommend you're not in double title screen, so it's a give and take on when you want to actually use these and what you can chain into these glitches. Alright, so we've pretty thoroughly thought about how we might be able to use movement leading into a glitch. Again, whenever you might have some glitch set up with double title screen, think about screens that you can add on to that prior to it to make use of the double title screen movement techniques. That's all well and good. There's one last way you can use double title screen movement in around other glitches, and that's using them after glitches. And if you know anything about the other glitches, that doesn't make immediate sense, because you have to basically use up double title screen to even set them up. You would do something in one file, set it up, and transfer it to a second file, and in doing so you've resolved and concluded double title screen. But what we're going to do is talk about triple title screen. Now, for as interesting of a title of that might sound, triple title screen is not at all very useful. It doesn't really help you do any additional layering things. You're always transferring from one file to another, so you only need double title screen for actual glitches. Triple title screen is also very constrained. You can only really control one layer at a time, like normal. And the extra title screen stuff doesn't let you do additional things three at a time. You're just doing one thing, then another, then another. And it's also pretty specific in how it can be set up. Because of that, your controls can lock up in other ways, and the types of glitches you can set up is constrained because the first file you'll open, you can't really move around in it. You'll be going between just the two actual title screen layers. We'll talk about that in a moment. How do we actually set it up? Well, I'm over in Haunted 1, as we might imagine. We're going to jump off the world, watch something in the journal, and do our very typical double title screen start to this. We're not going to do the one that keeps journal state. We're going to clear journal state, whatever variant of that you like, but that is watching something in the journal to create the new title screen instance. And as we do that, we're going to do something a little differently. We've mentioned in the past that if you press A or B or leave up a box while you're creating that second title screen, it can lock up your controls or do bad things. Well, we're actually going to do something in around that to create the third title screen. And it has to be done in this specific way, otherwise the layering isn't right when you create three title screens. You might think that there's this menu in the background even when you have double title screen. Why can't we use it then? Again, just how the layerings of controls work, it doesn't work, but it has been discovered, this triple title screen, to work in this way. So we're going to explain it this way, and this would be a fast setup of it anyways. Alright, so I'm going to watch something in the journal. I clear this once. It goes through this title sequence, and I can actually just mash A here, because right after that, we have this box, and I have to very quickly go up to yes there, before Cryware completely fades out. You do have to be quick on that part. But that opens up another title screen instance. And it also took one of the title screens over to the new game because there's an activation. That's plenty fine. If I press and hold this, even if I didn't do it from the new game or not, I'm skipping the cutscene, and that does another title sequence. So now we have our third title screen. And this, we don't want to press extra buttons. We're going to close the cryware just with a single press, nothing else pressed after that. We now have 3 title screens. One is on press any button, one's on continue, one's on settings. If one of them was on new game, if I had left it there, just holding B preemptively going into that screen, you wouldn't really see the settings layer, it would be on top of the other one. One way or another, there's 3 layers here. And again, you're only controlling one at a time. And the way we've set it up is that the layers are proper and we won't lock up our controls. If you do other types of setups, a triple title screen might seem like it's working for a while, but once you get into the game, the controls are locked up. Alright, so what can we actually do with this? Not much, as I've been saying. Most glitch setups require moving around to transfer some sort of cutscene, walk to a boss trigger, anything like that. So there's not a whole lot we can do. What we can do is warps, and that's about it. Warps, specifically with the ones that can be done just using the cutscenes at the start of a story, are viable from this because we don't actually have to move around the game. It just immediately loads in a cutscene that we can make use of. And so let's maybe demonstrate that. Ophelia 1, not going to work because there's only one cutscene, and well, we'll talk about that more in the warps video, but you'd have to normally go to the journal if you want to warp to Flame's Grace. Likewise, you have to go to journal for Atlas Dam. There's a few of these that would actually work. The one that I usually would actually use in practice, maybe something like Primrose makes sense. If you want the specifics on which ones would make sense for this, you can maybe look at the warps video. Any of them that can be done just with the starting cutscenes themselves and don't need you to go into the journal afterwards would be fine for this. Alright, so loading this in. We'll get through this. I'm going to skip the cutscene. And this is normally the next cutscene that you would use as a warp point in this, so let's go ahead and do that. And again, I didn't move around to be able to do this glitch, so it's useful within triple title screen. Other glitches where you have to actually move around, you wouldn't be able to do much with triple title screen, but warps with this first cutscene is fine. Even if you have to even to the menus to warp, it's less viable in triple. Again, you can't really control the game that opens on the first instance. You can skip through cutscenes and that's about it. Alright, so let's conclude the warp just by opening up an actual file. This is the one that's going to then warp. Pressing holding B to actually complete the warp. We just warped across. And we now have Cyrus warped to Sunshade. And we still have one last title screen layer, so we can now do double title screen type movement. Again, very situational that you want this. It really comes into how much you can figure out about, well, setting things up. But a good time to do it, fortunately, is right after warping. There are, again, some constraints on where you can warp to, but if you can warp and then use the double title screen stuff to move around while you don't even have evasive maneuvers, or get across some screens, skip some encounters, explore the world, then that works pretty well. Cyrus might not be the best example. You might want one of the NPCs that actually, one of the characters that can guide NPCs, or Hunt as well would work, although you also want evasive maneuvers in some situations. Again, a lot of this comes down to specific routing, how much you can actually make use of this movement around the world. A lot of that is open, yet to be explored. Fortunately, triple title screen does not take much time in comparison to just double title screen, so if you're warping already, maybe consider triple title screen if it works for that specific warp point, and how that might affect things. Anyhow, from here is just your typical double title screen stuff. You can move around. You wouldn't really use this for an additional setup of a glitch afterwards, because, well, that base game is sort of our main file, and whenever you're doing transfers of glitches, you're going to be usually having your main file there be the receiving end on it, not the one that sets it up, so we're not going to then use this layer of double title screen to set something up. You'd have to be pretty situational to come up with something that makes use of this for an actual glitch setup, but we can still use this extra title screen layer to move around. That's about it. The last topic I'm going to bring up in this video is a pretty full transfer glitch. So like many of the glitches in this series, it's making use of double title screen to load one file in, then another, and transfer between them. But it fits in quite well with this movement tech that we've been covering in this video, because the glitch by itself is pretty useless. You're not going to be setting double title screen up just for this. You'd only use it as one final bit of movement tech, or one adjustment to screens, as you've done double title screen movement to move around the world. So again, pretty situational, but maybe you've moved across a bunch of screens, avoiding encounters, using intangibility, and this would be maybe the final bit that you do if you're not using double title screen for anything else. And what it is a coordinate transfer. It's going to be able to take the coordinates of where you are on one screen and apply it to some other screen. with some limitations. Alright, so to demonstrate this, I've gone over to Northreach, and we can see that we're set ourselves right outside Northreach on the Northreach Wilds screen. And we're going to take the coordinates of where we currently are on Northreach Wilds and have it apply to the Northreach screen itself. Now, Northreach Wilds is a very tall screen, so we're really high up in the coordinate system. We're not too far left or right or up or down. It's actually pretty well centered in that regard, but we are quite high up. And so if we take these coordinates and apply it to the Northreach screens, we're going to be up in the sky, a bit out of bounds as well. We'll see this as a nice demonstration that it's repositioning us. It's not a very useful one, but it's nice and clear that we've been repositioned. And so how does this work? Well, it's doing something that I mentioned to avoid before because it cleared things out. When we go through loading zones, that's considered an event activation. And if we do that on the file load, we've mentioned that's going to load in a file and kind of break things. It'll take us out of double title screen at the very least. But doing so does consider itself a sort of transfer. It's going to be doing a file load at the same time as the loading zone, and those combined is a transfer. We're transferring the loading of the screen onto the file. Now what file gets loaded? Well, it's always whatever is most recently opened by the game. So the one I just opened was a save I actually made on Northreach Wilds, but I moved near this autosave. Or it's whatever save is most recently made. And if we're doing this with a loading zone, and there is one other way to do this that we'll get to next, but if we're doing this with a loading zone, that'll automatically create a new autosave as we do this, so it's actually always going to be creating the autosave and loading into that autosave. So there's not much choice as far as files goes. In general, there's not really much choice which files it's loading in. To fully summarize how this glitch winds up working, the extent of it is that we're loading in a screen, and that's what's being transferred, and the file that receives it is whatever one we opened recently, and that's where it pulls the coordinates as well as your characters and everything else from. So, when we go through the loading zone, it's going to create an autosave. We're also still going to have that loading zone sort of be active, but at the same time, because we do it in a way that it opens up a file at the same time, it'll take the autosave it just made, use its coordinates and its character, which is the exact same character, keep those around, and then apply the loading zone transition to it. And it won't take the proper coordinates from that loading zone transition, it'll just take whatever it found from the save file, the autosave it had. Because we basically skip past that. Setting the coordinates is the first thing that happens with a loading zone, apparently. Alright, let's just see this in practice. It's really simple in execution. You can do it by accident very often. All we have to do is be tangible, walk through a loading zone, and make sure we do it from this main screen towards the file load side. So let's just go do that. Walking through there. Again, that's an event confirmation. It loaded us in the file, and we can see we're well out of bounds. This is in Northreach, but not at the proper coordinates that should be set. We can see it's just behind the buildings here. And, in fact, if I fall off the world, its default coordinates are also set to whatever just got transferred. And this will be a little bit easier to see. We were actually up in the sky, but before everything loaded in visually, we fell down to the ground. If I fall off the world, we can see where it actually put us for a moment. Yes, we were up in the sky, and that's then that we fell into that position. So yes, we've transferred coordinates. Again, this is not very useful. It's a pretty big waste of double title screen in most regards, but if you're just using double title screen to move around the world, maybe after doing a warp, maybe you've skipped some encounters, all of that, this could be a final step. You usually wouldn't do it going into a town, but instead you would do it going across some sort of screen that you get encounters. You have to kind of find the situations in which it's useful. It's nothing super easy to figure out about that, because it's just how one coordinate system maps onto another. It's pretty random and arbitrary, no alignment overall. But there are some situations where you could maybe skip some encounters or jump across a screen a little bit. If you've done a lot of double title screen movements just to avoid encounters, maybe test out some loading zones and see where they place you on the following screens. It could be a final step before you close out of double title screen overall. Alright, and as always, if you ever watch something in the journal, it sets you back to the default location for the screens, whatever you might be on. And if we fall off the world now, the coordinates are set back to where they should be. Alright, I'm going to demonstrate this again just with one other way of setting this up, and that's going to be, instead of using loading zones, just using a map warp. Alright, here I am with double title screen set up again. And I'm just going to, again, briefly talk about what's being transferred and from where. it's always transferring from your most recently activated file. That's either the file that you load into, or more likely, if you've been doing a bunch of movement with double title screen, it's whatever loading zone you most recently passed through with an autosave. So just keep that in mind, that you can't really control it too much if you're doing a bunch of things chained together, but maybe you create a very deliberate save somewhere, and then load into it and activate it in some special sequence that you've got planned out. Again, these are very situational, or they're just things to check as you're finishing things up, but otherwise not much to do. Now you might want to consider, if you're routing this, why can't we just save while in double title screen? And that's because going to it and interacting with a save point is very unreliable, or just entirely too unstable to work with double title screen. It's a mix of events to activate into it. It's got its own menu, it's got a confirm and a cancel box out of it. Even if you do things very carefully with settings, it still locks up the controls by the end of it. I haven't been able to solve that one, but in theory it wouldn't be too useful anyways. Again, this is very niche with how it can be applied. Alright, so what exactly is the other way of doing the coordinate transfer? Well, we've seen when we go through a loading zone that works. The other way is just with warping. And so let's demonstrate that. And now our current activated save is this one at an actual save point. You could make this transfer from an autosave if you wanted, just as well. But I'm going to transfer it with this one. It's pretty comparable to the coordinates we just used. It should be just down a bit. Kind of similar height and elevation. And so let's see what we can get out of this when we go to Northreach this time. And this time, when we go to Northreach, we're just going to do it with fast travel. So I'm going to highlight over it, and we're just going to confirm the fast travel once we're on the file load side. And I will say, this one you kind of want to wait pretty long into it. You can't just do it any moment when going towards file load. You want to make sure it's activated once file load is pretty well fully transferred, or on the file load side of things. But it's not too bad. Just hitting continue, and yes, anywhere around there. Alright, it seems we fell in bounds, and that kind of makes sense. We would have been up in the sky, presumably, but before we were back behind the last of the houses. That save point is a bit south from where we were just with the autosave before, and we land inside the town. And of course, this is not the default coordinates, this is inside of the town. Default coordinates would have been by the entrance. Can't really demonstrate where we fell from, because we fell in bounds. Can't fall out of bounds as easily anymore, but yeah, they replaced us. Alright, and so again, these are pretty situational. Maybe if you do a bunch of warps around, if you find some movements with your double title screen, check for anything that might be done. These warps into a town with the fast travel is pretty useless, because you're not skipping past any encounters when you do that. Maybe it positions you onto a screen in a certain way, but I'm doubtful. It's very hard to find these, as was mentioned before, just because it's specific coordinates of one screen mapping onto another screen. Most of the time you're out of bounds in a useless spot. Even if you are in bounds, it's not really helpful necessarily. Sometimes it'll put you a good amount away into some sort of screen that you get encounters on, and maybe it's helpful there. I'll show one use case. Well, we've seen one use case actually in the intro to this. That one was something that might resemble a use case. Again, these aren't very useful overall, but in that we were looking at Ophelia Chapter 1, going to the Shrine of the Flamebringer. And we noticed that as we went into the cave, that was done with this sort of coordinate transfer. We took the coordinates from the, well, let's just get names of screens going. We were on Path to the Cave of Origin. Yes, that's the name of the cave, sorry about that. Path to the Cave of Origin. We took the coordinates of the loading zone that leads into Cave of Origin and placed that inside Cave of Origin, and that actually put us kind of near the boss in that case. Maybe if you're doing some walking arounds in the early game, that could be helpful. But again, pretty hard to find use cases. Alright, that about covers all the different things. In summary, if you can move with double title screen just to set up glitches, that's more than enough. Just understanding going between the main screen and file load to navigate around, that was plenty. On the speedrunning side of things, this tech with path actions to move further distances, it's nice, and if you can think about the different glitch setups you might do in a particular route, see if you can incorporate it leading up to the glitches. Following up on glitches is less common, because that always has to be after a warp, and usually you'd want to do that later when you have evasive maneuvers, but usually you're warping before evasive maneuvers so you can get to some sort of grinding encounter. It all mixes around a little bit. It's pretty situational that you'd be able to do large amounts of double title screen movement, but sometimes you can fit it in nicely. And if and when you're doing just things for double title screen's sake with movement, you'll want to end it with either a transfer glitch or the credits skip, or maybe a coordinate transfer. Otherwise, you're usually losing out on whatever progress you're making by walking in double title screen. So those are the two main use cases, or I guess 3 overall, that you might see this in.